With current events that have taken place in our lives in the world over the past couple of years, a lot of people are asking, are we headed into the end times according to Bible prophecy? We have invited David Clareau into the studio today. David, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Do you think the events of the last 2 years, the pandemic, the political atmosphere between Russia and the Ukraine, NATO, the United States and China, and other events like 5G networks coming into our lives, Big Brother looming perhaps greater, are we headed toward the end time? What's your take?
Well, I certainly do think that we are very close to the second coming, actually, because of all the progress science has made over the years, and the mandates that are being put out right now to try to coerce people or to eliminate their civil rights, their constitutional rights, or their the Bill of Rights in countries, in whole countries actually. And
can you point us to the Bible verses that kind of link those things together?
In 2 Thessalonians, for instance, it says that there has to be a falling away first from the faith, and the man of sin needs to be revealed, the son of perdition, before Jesus comes back. So these things haven't happened yet. The son of perdition, or the vile person, or the little horn, the man of sin actually represents an antichrist person and government.
Can you specifically give us some of the Bible passages that talk about these things? Especially, you mentioned the little horn. What is the little horn? The vile person, that's kind of easy to understand. And the term antichrist, do you think the term antichrist is actually talking about a person who will come out on the world scene, or is that more of a metaphor, antichrist?
No, I think it will definitely be a person, according to Bible prophecy, because he has he exalts himself above all that is called God. So it is a person, and of course an ideology that eliminates God from the picture. But he does sit in the temples. He stands in the temple, and or the abomination of desolation stands in the temple, and he sits in the temple. So he is definitely a person. He has a mouth speaking great things.
We're going to put a few of these Bible verses that David is talking about on the screen here.
Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things.
That all seems so mystical, 10 horns and little horn, and what's all that? What is that all referring to?
It's all symbolic, of course, and it's a symbolism of end time events that are going to happen. And I think if God got any more precise than he has in the word, they would probably abolish or outlaw the Bible itself, because it's so revealing about end time events. Because the authoritarian government that arises in the end time is a very benevolent dictator, and he rises up and he's trying to bring a universal system, take away governments, take away borders, take away rights, and just establish an order that he controls, or the group of people control. He's trying to do a good thing, except it eliminates our rights and freedoms. So what happens is it puts us on either being on his side in total submission or being rebels against. It's kind of like what's happening in many of the countries today.
Going back to this passage about the 10 horns and the little horn that rises up, what actually do you think that's talking about, those 10 horns? Are those 10 governments?
Yes, apparently it's a continuation of the dictatorial, authoritarian governments of Rome. The little horn, well, the 10 horns give their power unto this new authoritarian government. And
so you mean the Rome of the Roman Empire of
yes
2,000 years ago, or
yes, it's a continuation in that in Daniel chapter 2 it says that the legs were of iron and represented Rome, and the feet and the toes are part of iron and part of clay, representing the dictatorial control that Rome had, and also the democracies of today. So there is that element of dictatorial power. That's where they're trying to promote China right now as an example of an authoritarian government that is taking care of its people. But of course we know behind the scenes there's a lot of negative things happening there.
What do you think some of those 10 toes represent today?
Well, they represent the 10 horns also in Daniel, further on in Daniel, that give their power unto the final world government.
Okay, we just take a break here and put that verse up on the Bible passage that David's talking about, the 10 horns.
And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful.
So, I mean, do you think the United States is one of the 10 toes, or Russia one of the 10 toes, China, France, Great Britain? Who gets to be, who gets included and excluded from the 10-toe vision there, do you think? Or is it something we just can't actually say right now?
Yes, well, actually, I believe that if you look at world events, you can see who's going on the side of the dictatorships and who's going on the side of the democracies, who's fighting for the rights of the people and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and who is fighting to control and mandate policies and keep the people under subjection.
Right.
So there, you can see that happening in the world today in different countries. So
I know here in the United States, you know, the predominant thought is that democracy is the best way to go, and we here in America are very thankful for that. However, if you go to some places that have dictatorships, and I'm not talking about China, but say you go to Saudi Arabia, or you go to some of these other countries that are effectively dictatorships ruled by a king, and the people don't have too much freedom, but they like their dictators. In other words, benevolent dictatorships sometimes work pretty well, and the people like them. If you go there, people don't want to change their government. So I guess you could have a good dictatorship or a bad dictatorship if the king or the dictator is a good guy or a bad guy, depending on, and I'm not promoting dictatorships here, because we're very thankful for the democracy, but it's an interesting point of view when you live in a place that is a dictatorship, and if the people are happy and content with what they've got, that might be a concept a bit difficult for us here in the United States to understand, but that's the way it is in some places.
Right. Well, that's true, and that's how the final world dictator arises. Actually, he's quite benevolent in that he signs a covenant for 7 years, and it has to do. It's a religious covenant, so he's all for religious freedoms, and so he looks like a very benevolent person. But what happens is, after 3.5 years, he realizes that he needs to subdue anyone who is not going along with his policies, and that's where the persecution starts. It's called the Great Tribulation. And it's against those of a religious background, I believe, the church, because in Revelation 12 it says the church, the bride of Christ, the Christians, flee into the wilderness where there's a place prepared for 3.5 years. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days.
Could I backtrack just for a moment and ask you, since we were talking about the Antichrist and the covenant, does that mean there's some talk about the construction of a third temple in Jerusalem? There are several trains of thought on that third temple. Of course, the first temple was built by Solomon about 1,000 years before the birth of Christ, and then it was rebuilt after the Jews came out of captivity in Babylon. And then the third, and then was destroyed in 70 AD. Now, a third temple, if it were to be constructed today, some Christians believe that is really just a metaphor, that there won't actually be a temple. What is your opinion on that?
Well, due to the fact that this dictator does sign a peace treaty allowing religious freedoms, and it has to do with the Jewish people and the Jewish worship, I believe that there will be a temple, because it says that there will be a sacrifice and an oblation unto God, because he makes it cease after the 3.5 years. He causes it to cease, and he exalts himself, and he places an abomination of desolation in the temple. So here's an abomination standing in the temple.
Right, so in your view, it's going to be an actual physical temple that's going to... It is interesting, if you go to Israel today, there is an institute that was created to design the third temple. And you can go to Jerusalem today, and you can walk into their offices and actually see a model of the temple that they'd like to build. Right. And of course, that's a whole big subject in itself, where it will be built on the Dome of the Rock, in that sacred place, which is a sacred place of worship for both Jews and Muslims, and some Christians also.
Right. Jerusalem is is a central hub for all the religions that believe in a single God. So
yes.
And so yes, when he confirms that covenant, it only
he
goes on.
He being the Antichrist figure that you're talking about.
He has a certain amount of recognition in the world, and he looks quite good, actually, for allowing that. But then he exalts himself, because really in his heart he doesn't believe in God, but he allows everyone else to worship the way they want. And finally, when he sees that the religious people will not follow him totally and accept a mark in the right hand or the forehead in order to go along with the commercial system of that day.
I'd like to ask you, you alluded to this period of time called the Great Tribulation. I do know that in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus talked about this Great Tribulation. Right. And there's a divided opinion in the Christian world whether Christians will have to pass through that period of time, the Great Tribulation, or whether they will be taken up. There's Of course, Christians refer to the second coming of Jesus also as the rapture, where the Christians will be taken off the earth and they won't have to go through the Great Tribulation. Or will they go through? There is a very well-known movie called Left Behind. And of course, the message in that movie is that Jesus comes before the Great Tribulation. So could you explain that just a bit? And how does that compare to this other event in the book of Revelation called the wrath of God? What's the difference?
Right. Well, I'd stick to what Jesus said when in Matthew 24, when the disciples went to Jesus and said, what'll be the sign of thy coming in the end of the world? Okay, so the sign of his coming, and he gave many signs of his coming, but one was that there would be an abomination of desolation. It says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel stand in the holy place, then shall be great tribulation. And then he says, immediately after the tribulation, that he would appear in the clouds.
Well, let's stop and put those verses on the screen here.
When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So he's going to come back right after that. It says that he gathers together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So everyone who's left on earth and in heaven are all going to come together because we're the bride of Christ.
My question for you about the Great Tribulation, very many pastors and preachers that say Christians will not go through the Great Tribulation, they say that God would not allow Christians to suffer like that or to go through bad things like that. And they quote there are many verses in the Bible which say God will not tempt us to be tempted above that which we are able, and verses of comfort. And they use those passages from the Bible to claim that we will not have to go through the Great Tribulation. What is your answer to a pastor or a preacher who gives that message?
Well, I think the church will be stronger than that, actually. The called out ones, those who are in tune with God. They're the two prophets that prophesy right through the tribulation, right to the end. They're not killed until the end. And so I believe the church is going to stand up for what they believe, and there's a place prepared of God that he's going to feed us and care for us for 1,260 days. That's the woman in the wilderness, Revelations 12:6. And I believe that feeding is going to be a spiritual feeding.
Okay, well, so we're going by the words of Jesus and what Jesus said in these passages, and we'll stick to that and say that's the way it's going to be.
Yes.
I think there are a lot of Christians out there who read in the book of Revelation, and then you get to this period called the wrath of God. How does that? What is that in relation to the Great Tribulation?
Okay. So actually, the Great Tribulation, the church is in the wilderness, the bride of Christ, and waiting for Jesus' return, which he said would be after the tribulation.
And just to make it clear, the wilderness, you mean out in the forest someplace, or?
Well, that is a good question, actually, because it doesn't specify. But I believe that it's going to be we're going to be ostracized from the world itself. So wherever we are, when Jesus comes back, it says he's going to gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So we're all over the world. So it's not a specific place, but I believe it's a spiritual place.
Let me just interject. We talked about the mark of the beast, that this man, the antichrist, will be, asking everybody or mandating everybody to take. But then there's also a seal of God during that same period of time that Christians will have from God. So I guess you either get the seal of God or the mark of the beast. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly right. Very, very good point. Yes, we're sealed with the seal of God, so nothing can hurt us, actually.
So during that time of the Great Tribulation, Christians, if they get the seal of God, will have some protection.
Oh, most definitely. In fact, the trumpets of tribulation are poured out upon the ungodly, those who are part of the system, who receive the mark of the beast, receive his, or worship him or follow him in any way. They receive the trumpets of tribulation, whereas the church is, of course, in the wilderness, separated from that and not receiving any of that.
Okay, I'd just like to interject something here. It is interesting today. There's so much fear if you read the newspapers or on the internet or watch television reports. There's a lot of fear that is put out there. But when talking to Christians, people who believe in God, it seems like they have a lot less fear than the unbelievers. In other words, believers in God and in the Bible seem to me, in my conversations with them, to have a lot less fear about these things than unbelievers. And it seems like this would be the case if you have the mark of the beast versus the seal of God in your forehead. A lot of unbelievers do have a great amount of fear, and you see that in a lot of television reports, through the pandemic and the world situation, the possibility of war on the world scene. Fear versus faith, believers and unbelievers.
Right.
And that's pretty good reason to want to believe in God and to receive God in your life and to receive his Son, Jesus, in our lives. So some of what you've been reading here, from the book of Revelation especially, and these passages from the book of Daniel, it's pretty scary stuff, what's happening in the world. What would be your advice to somebody who is fearful about the future, fearful about what's happening in the world today, and fearful of end time events? What would you say to that person?
Well, I believe that faith casts out all fear. Love casts out fear, and the faith comes from hearing the word and getting familiar with what we're going to be going through. I think a closer relationship with Jesus and hearing from the Lord and getting our spiritual nourishment from the Lord directly would be very encouraging, because you have a relationship with Jesus that no one can take away. So that encourages faith in itself. So I suggest people read the Word, get familiar with what's happening, maybe associate with groups like the Bible for You, for instance. Write in if they have any questions and try to get the answers that they're looking for, because the answers are here, and there's no reason to fear.
I like that. The answers are here, and there's no reason to fear.
Yes.
Well, David, I'd like to thank you for being here with us today, and we'd like to thank you all for watching. And we hope that some of the subjects that we've talked about, I know it's a big subject. I know we're going to have to come back and look at some of the particulars of what we've discussed here.
Yes.
But we'd like to, that's very good advice. If you'd like to know more about these events or have any questions about what has been said here, or disagree with what has been said here, we'd like to hear your reasons and your comments, so please write them below. Thank you for watching. We'd like to invite you back again soon, David, to talk about end time events. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel already, we'd like to invite you to do that right now.